Welcome everyone, PowerShell Summit 2019. Yes. Hope you guys are going to have fun today. I had fun writing this lab. I'm so excited for you to get to play with this stuff. This is going to be a lot of fun. My name is Ashley McGlone. This is my 6th year here at the Summit as a presenter. So I've had a popular TechNet blog for a while when I worked for Microsoft. My handle on Twitter was GoTPFE. A lot of people found me that way in my content. I did a lot of writing around Active Directory, PowerShell, DSC, those type topics. And this year I'm here to do something a little different. I know in previous years, Lee would wow us with his security sessions, but there was no hands-on component. I thought we really need to get our hands into this to show you how it works. And so what I've built for you today is a very basic hands-on lab. And there are additional features that we're not exploring here just to get you in the door, all right? We're not going to go into encrypted logging and different things. We're just going to keep it simple, straight down the middle, show you how to do transcription, script block logging, and some other tricks. Because if you haven't been keeping up with the cyber news, there is, here, let me give this to Keith here. Thanks, yeah. So in the cyber news, over the last several years, it's been very popular that there's all these post-exploitation PowerShell. You know, we look at the PowerShell gallery and all these wonderful modules for us, right? But then there's the dark side of the internet where all these people have created other kinds of PowerShell modules to infect your stuff and to do it very creatively. And so what we're doing here today is to give you some ammo so when your CIO comes to you and says, I just got back from this conference, PowerShell is bad, shut it down everywhere. See, what your CIO doesn't know that they're saying is, shut off the one thing that we can track and see what they're doing to force them to go use other tools we can't track. And that's not good. So I want to show you today how to use some things that Lee Holmes actually published in 2015, but a lot of people still aren't aware of it. And if you are using it in your environment today, I'd love to hear about it as we go and get started. But so that's really what this is about today, is to give you some tools how to find the badness in your environment when people say that they're using PowerShell. You know, it's this double-edged sword. All of a sudden, it does all these great things for us as administrators, but the bad guys get to use it too. So I'm going to show you how to find the bad guys. That's what this session is about. So the way it's structured, when you get out to the GitHub, you're going to download the PDF. And by the way, I should just mention, what you're seeing in the lab-hosted environment says Tanium on it. Okay, that's my employer. This is not a Tanium lab, but my employer has this really cool thing they call Lab Space they built in AWS, and we use it for all of our conferences to host lab sessions. And even though this is not a Tanium lab, I went to my company and I said, hey, I'm going to do this thing. Could you guys offer me some lab hosting? And they're like, yeah, no problem. We value the community. We think that's a good thing. So my employers graciously spun up 100 instances of 3 VMs each in AWS at no cost to you guys for our lab today. So I thank them for their, providing that lab space. Also with me today is Keith. You want to introduce yourself, Keith?
I'm Keith Garner. I've been around PowerShell since I think I saw my first presentation while at Microsoft in 2003 with Monad, but now working with Ashley at Tanium. Yeah, it's been great because most of the labs here are kind of destructive. We're going to be modifying group policy. We're going to be doing a couple things. There's no reason why you can't do this in your own lab, but you probably don't want to do this on your personal machine. So luckily we've been able to have a lab here that we can kind of destroy and tear down and cause problems and recover later.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't want your corporate AV going off on your machines that you brought in today. So, so here's the way this is structured. We're going to start off with a hands-on lab on just the basics of PowerShell policies. And this is a hunting exercise. How do I find malicious PowerShell commands that have been used in my environment? So in addition to the policies that Lee described in his famous paper in 2015, PowerShell Hearts the Blue Team, that's like starting place. It's linked in your lab guides. You've got to go read that for starters. All right, that's your kind of your beginning place, and then it's going to open up this whole Pandora's box for you of all these other things. You're like, oh wait, people use PowerShell for bad things? Yes, they do, in very clever ways. So that's what we're going to find. So this first lab is going to show you all the places that you can go look for badness on your Windows systems using these policies. It's going to show you some PowerShell techniques with like get when event. How do I search for a targeted query in my event logs? And these commands that are provided for you are just to get you started. All those parameters on those things, the filter XML, all that, you need to dive in, learn how that works, tweak it for your own uses, but this is just to get you started. And then, once we're done with the first lab, it's kind of a choose your own adventure. This first lab should take about an hour or so, but then after that, we've got labs 2, 3, and 4. Lab 2, we've talked about PowerShell Core already this week. PowerShell Core on Linux and Mac has logging built in. And so I want to show you how to turn that on and how to check and see what commands are executing in your PowerShell Core environment as well. Then the third lab is for GIA, Just Enough Administration, PowerShell remoting. What does it look like? What kind of fingerprints do people leave when they do a remoting session? How do I find what they did on my server when they weren't physically logged in? And then the last one, 4, is an actual PowerShell Empire attack against a Windows 10 VM where we've disabled Windows Defender. Now, Windows Defender out of the box will get a lot of this stuff, so we have to kind of start Windows 10 with one arm tied behind its back and no Defender turned on. But we're going to actually launch an attack from a Linux machine into a Windows 10 machine. That's a PowerShell-based attack. Look at those events in the logs, the transcripts, and see what it's doing on the machine. As you go through these logs, there's going to be a lot of noise that you'll have to kind of sort through to find the gems of what actually happened. So it's a bit of a detective scenario as well. It's going to be a lot of fun. So those are the labs. You want to start with the first one. I mean, if you want to skip the first one and go straight for the candy in 2, 3, or 4, you're welcome to do that. But you'll probably need some of those concepts in the first lab. So go ahead, dive in, go through the first lab, and then pick which one is more interesting to you, whether you want to try it on Linux or GIA or the PowerShell Empire staged environment. And then in the GitHub site with the lab docs, lab 99 is just a little README that tells you how you can build this out at home, because we're not going to have enough time to do all 4 labs. That was never the intention. Make sure you get through number 1. If you want to do the rest of these at home, there's a little guide that tells you how to build your own little lab with a domain controller and a Windows 10 box and a Debian Linux machine that's got Empire installed. So all the links are there. It tells you how to build this out, and you can continue to play with this. Probably not at, I was going to say probably not at work. You could play with this at work if you're just really careful to keep it, sequestered away and not going to touch anything else, but that'd be fine. But as soon as you stand up, some of these tools in your work environment, InfoSec's going to be knocking on your door, so just be careful with that. So anyway, yeah, unless you are InfoSec, yeah. So knock yourself out, guys and gals. Have fun with this lab. Keith and I will be circulating if you have questions. I'm not really intending to walk through the whole lab from the front. If there's pieces that you want to see me demonstrate on the big screen, I'm happy to do that. But this is really intended as a time for you to get your hands in there and to play with it yourself. So go ahead, start with lab 01. Now, on the C drive of the Windows systems, there is a labs folder. And basically what I did was I wrote some scripts to parse out of the Markdown file all the command lines and dump them into a PS1 file. So you can, instead of having to type some of those really long strings, you can cheat and copy them out of that C labs directory. Some of the commands will work in the ISE, some are better in the console. But anyway, I'm going to stop talking now. You guys just go to it. Yeah. Okay. So this is a really good question I wanted to answer for everybody. And there's one step in the lab where it talks about an ICAR file, EICAR, and that is a known virus test signature. So when you're McAfee or Symantec or Defender, you drop a file with that string in it, and it will flag it as a virus as a test. So AMPC, Anti-Malware Scan Interface, was introduced in Windows 10 and Server 2016 as a similar type feature that scans scripts as they execute. And so this string in the lab is a test string so that you can make sure it's working without using something malicious in your environment. Yeah, so that's what the AMPC test string was, and the ICAR. Yeah, there's a great Wikipedia article on ICAR, and you can drop that file on your machine just for fun sometimes and mess with your AV people. Yeah. I'll also mention that as you're going through the labs hunting for these event IDs, I know this is a PowerShell conference, and we make fun of people that click on things. All right, but the Windows Event Viewer will actually help you triage these events very quickly, because it's a really easy way and a friendly way to go through them. You want to use the scripts later when it comes to automating your hunting techniques, but just to kind of learn and get a feel for it. I mean, you can do it in the console, that's fine, but I know even for me, I've been teaching PowerShell for years, even for me it's easier in the GUI sometimes to just see what is happening in these events and the other events that occur around them. So it's okay to use the GUI in this session. How many people could not get the net adapter module to show up as true in the list? Wow, all right, just skip it. As somebody else already pointed out to me, it was working, it was logging the events. For some reason, it was just not showing flagged as true. I promise it worked when I wrote it.
That's right.
Yeah.
If you remove the list available flag, it shows accurately as true.
Okay. If you remove the list available, it shows true. All right, I'm gonna repeat that for the recording. So if you remove the list available switch, it will show true. So what I'll do then is I will edit the lab guide right now. Let's see. Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, yeah. Oh, shoot, I forgot to fix that. Yep. Let's see, if you repeat the get module list available command above, remove the parameter list available. Yeah, that was a problem. You said it was line 105?
105 and 109 both have it.
Okay, yeah, let me show everybody this one. So actually, the problem is that it's indented. Your here string must be against the margin. So in this command where you're doing the, excuse me. So there's a command here where you've got a here string, which is the at quote and then the quote at. Just bump that to the margin in your ISE and it will work. I apologize, I didn't get a chance.
Yeah, there's a problem in the sample scripts.
Oh, here?
Server where it has invalid characters. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so what happened was, what you can't see here is there is a mix of curly quotes and straight quotes, which PowerShell interprets them all as straight quotes. So the intention was, and obfuscation was to use curly quotes, straight quotes kind of mixed together. Unfortunately, that creates a Unicode problem when you're trying to post this to GitHub. So I apologize. In order to fix that, if it's not working, just convert all the quotes to straight quotes and it should work just fine. Yeah. Yes, escape character. I thought I fixed it when I posted it up, but evidently not. So what I'll do is we go through the lab, we find these little things, I will make notes, and then I will repost them to GitHub later after the session. And if you continue reading in the next step, it'll tell you that. Yep. Yeah, the PowerShell v2 feature by default is not there. If you try to enable it, it'll tell you it's missing a .NET dependency. That's a good thing. You don't want that feature enabled. So, with those curly quotes, trying to publish that and render it, it took me several tries. There was like the Unicode, like extended double characters, angstroms, weirdness in there, and yeah, just clean up those double quotes if you need to. And turn up the speakers so you can enjoy the music. Yeah. Okay, so we're 1 hour in, and we've got 45 minutes left. So set your depth appropriately, depending on how much you want to get through while you're here with Keith and I. So there's a lot of thinking exercises at the end of each lab to provoke you to think about certain considerations when you take this back to work. You can save those thinking exercises for later if you want to just get through the hands-on part, to get through as much as you can while we're here. I didn't intend for us to finish all 4 labs. That was just I wanted to provide you a good experience that you could take with you beyond the conference and have some extra goodies to work through later as well. So think about how much you want to get through. You can skip pieces if you like, but just, again, it's not that you failed or you didn't get very far. It's the fact that I gave you a 4-course meal when you had a time to eat a peanut butter sandwich. So get through what you can while Keith and I are here. Ask your questions and go over after what really turns your wheels. Mm-hmm. That's a good question. So I want to answer this question for everybody. So the question is event log size. And I think I mentioned this somewhere in the lab guide. If I didn't, I overlooked it, but I'm pretty sure it's in there somewhere. So out of the box, 15 megs is the default log size. That's not going to get you very far, especially as these guys pointed out, running VS Code. The VS Code extension runs all kinds of PowerShell, just floods the logs too. It's kind of ugly. I'm going to find them on Twitter and call them out. So when it comes to how big should these logs be, that's really one of those engineering answers, right? It depends. So looking at the log activity, the criticality of the machines that you're implementing the logging on, there's a lot of research around this, a lot of papers that have been published by different security consultants and vendors. One guide I saw recommended 1 gig on both the Windows PowerShell log and the Windows PowerShell operational. There's 2 different PowerShell logs. To just bump them up to 1 gig. That's one option. Hopefully you've got newer hardware on your workstations and servers. You don't have to worry about the disk space. But that's one option, or 0.5 gig. Really it's just kind of set it and test and see how many days of activity you can get in there. Other techniques like looking at the PS readline history, there's no date stamping on that. You just kind of, something happened somewhere on this box interactively. Somebody physically typed the command. You don't know when. That's the benefit of the logs and the transcripts. It'll tell you exactly when it happened. Yeah, with script block logging, there's one of those settings that we explicitly did not set, which is the invocation headers for script block logging, which will give you a 4105 every time a command starts and a 4106 every time the command stops. That's going to add a lot of logging. So that's why we usually just go with the 4104 just to see the commands themselves without adding unnecessary noise. And in good old script block logging, every time you return to the prompt in the console, it'll log prompt, 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 all over the log. So I have an explicit filter that says where the message body does not contain prompt, because I know I'm not going to need that one. So that's part of this exercise, is going through, looking at the noise, developing your own filters. The challenge you run into with filter XPath, filter XML, it's a great trick. It's been around for years. I've got a couple of blog posts on it. Hey Scripting Guy blog's got posts on it. The problem there is you can't put wildcards for filtering the message body in your filter XPath at filter XML. And that's a big limitation. But you can say where the message body is not equal to prompt in your filter XPath. And that at least buys you some more real estate in what you're returning. But then after that, you're gonna filter it to select string or select object. Select string, which would be your grep type equivalent. Now at the end of this first lab, I'll call this out publicly as well, because this is something you really need to think about. If I'm using PowerShell to read the PowerShell logs, and let's say I do a get content on my transcript file, and so now I'm reading in PowerShell the contents of the transcript file, where does that go? It gets written right back into another transcript file. We call that PowerShell inception. So one of the things you need to be conscious of is PowerShell the best tool to do my investigation with? Or do I do my investigation on a designated machine where I know I'm going to flood the logs with a looping of junk? Or if I search for the string invoke Mimikatz, I've just inserted invoke Mimikatz into all my logs and transcripts as a search term, not the actual invocation of it. So I'm searching for Mimikatz in my logs. Now I'm going to find it for sure because I just added it myself. So you see that catch-22? There are some, for some things that I'm going to talk about later, I'll give you a quick commercial. So I do work for Tanium, but before that I worked for Microsoft for 8 years and I taught PowerShell. And what I did was I took the things that we did in this lab and I built it out in Tanium so I can set the policies at scale very quickly across all my machines. I can view the policy settings. Is the V2 feature enabled? All that very quickly in seconds across my enterprise. But then I can also scan all these logs, the transcripts, the PS readline history, all that for a list of, let's say, 200 of the most popular post-exploit commands. And that requires Tanium or some other tool of your choice, whatever you use in your enterprise to do event monitoring, Splunk, or whatever tool you use for your SIM. But for me in Tanium, I just create a batch file that uses all DOS-based commands, DOS command line, whatever. So I use WEVT util is the command line executable for Windows Event Log Utility. And you can dump and put your XPath filter in there and dump it out. And then I use find string, find str from the command line with a text file of all the keywords I want to find in that output. It's blunt. It's not very precise like PowerShell, but it gets the job done without poisoning your logs. And there's some other tricks along those lines, but that's what I did to solve that problem. You can solve that however you like. At 2 o'clock today and 4:07 on the other side, we're going to be doing a Tanium demo of that as part of some other things as well. You're welcome to come check that out. But you can implement that in whatever enterprise hunting tools that you use to use non-PowerShell ways to find the PowerShell bits. In Linux, obviously, that's pretty easy using things like grep and all that. So if you get to Lab 2, you'll see those techniques specifically, non-PowerShell ways to search the same logs. Yeah.
Maybe on a Windows box, you could install the exam system so that you put everything in one place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. there's enough there's enough built-in Windows system utilities to get you close, but certainly if you don't have Alcanced and all the other cut, you don't have all those cool little tips from the command line. So WSL would help for that. Yeah.
Hey, actually, going back to your question, your comments about log size. So the half gig, the gig, those sound like recommendations for people who don't have a SIM that are capturing logs and rolling over.
Yeah.
If you have a SIM, you have a recommended size and you think it's enough. I mean, I know it's still sort of more black magic than science on the log size, but when a SIM is involved and you know you're threading logs every day, is there a size that sort of fits?
I really can't give you anything on that. Yeah, I'm sorry. The challenge, yeah, on the local endpoint, it just depends on the frequency of your harvesting of those logs, and whether you want to have that evidence on the machine, for how long you want to retain it on the machine. So if you're using a SIM where you're archiving that, you want to try to filter that noise if possible, because your SIM's got tons of junk in it. And you're looking for the needle in the haystack, so try to filter as much as you can. Yeah. Yeah, Windows Event Forwarding is, there's Jessica Payne is a Microsoft, I'm not sure what her current title is, but she's in the cyber with Microsoft, and she has some really good articles you can find on Windows Event Forwarding.
Sort of point out since I'm turning transcription on, we've done that on the labs. Try and fire up the new Active Directory Administrative Center. Turn transcription on, that new utility will no longer work.
Oh, really?
It will not connect to the directory. As long as transcription's turned on in new, the DSAC utility won't work.
That's good to know.
Good way to know your admins.
I need to make a note of that.
Can you restate that, please?
Okay, yes, sorry, let me restate what he said. So the Windows Admin Center, DSAT, yeah. So the new ADUC that people don't like, that's PowerShell based, basically. So your new Active Directory Administrative Center, that's running PowerShell behind the scenes. So he said if you have transcription enabled and this PowerShell based Active Directory tool at the same time, it blocks this tool from working.
It just will not connect to any domain.
That's interesting. All right. So, yeah. So word from the field. That's one of the things I like about doing these sessions, because I hear what people have run into. So.
And if you use transcriptions for the network location, people have permissions with that on. Sorry.
Yeah.
Figure out a way around to let access administrative to the machine to run PowerShell. I don't secure the transcription location. Doesn't do me a lot of good to have a transcript that must be a laptop.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, Ashley, I may not be understanding something correctly, but you were talking about how your own command that you type in to investigate will get put into the log. Are we talking about the console you got canceled?
Anything. So if you run it as a script, or if you've got it typing it physically into the PS read line history, it would show up there. But yeah, if you run it as a script, it's, as we've observed in this lab, it's going to get caught in the events. It's going to get in the transcript.
So why wouldn't you just maybe copy out that log somewhere else?
Yeah, that's a typical security forensics methodology. So I'm rarely going to be analyzing patient 0 from patient 0. Usually I'm going to pull all those logs off with some other forensics tool and then look at them in a blast chamber of sorts where I don't care if things go bad, so I can look at it safely there. Yeah. There's a lot of tools that do that. Tanium has tools that do that. You can just suck those logs off and then go analyze them on another box. So I'm just curious, if you've moved on from lab 1, how many chose the Linux lab next? All right, how many chose the Geo lab next? All right, how many chose the PowerShell Empire? All right, yeah, cool, all right. Just let me know if you have to see anything else that's working. Scott pointed out that in the lab 4, for if you're doing the malware hunting, of course these are not really PowerShell script files, but just commands you're typing in the Empire environment. There's a rename, let me find, yeah, rename client 01. So the dash is not a legal character in the name, so I need to tweak that there. Yeah.
I mean, would it work if it was
It's just the conventions of the Empire tool. It just doesn't like dashes, I guess. Yeah. So I need to fix that in the guide as well. So let's talk about that. So the question is, you've got an orchestration tool, and part of that orchestration tool is you're using PowerShell remoting to run things on different machines. Is there a way to, in the GIA lab, you have to use a configuration name for the session. So if you're using an invoke command out of the orchestration tool, you can put the configuration name in there. If you don't have that option, by default, if you do a get PS session configuration on a machine, it'll give you a list of the default endpoints for PS remoting sessions. And you'll see that, I don't remember the exact name, it's like Microsoft.PowerShell, Windows.PowerShell, something like that. There's a default endpoint, and you have to be an administrator to have permissions to connect to that by default. So if you don't have that ability, what you can do is you can actually adjust the permissions and the capabilities on that default PS session configuration. So if you, Microsoft.PowerShell, yeah. So what you have to be aware of then is that forever and always after that, if I just do invoke command or enter PS session against that box, I'm going to get that restricted experience. So what you can do, this is a clever little trick, is you take that default remoting endpoint that people would normally enter PS session, and you can just crank it down to nothing, and then have an administrator session that's open entirely, but you have to know the session configuration name to get in. I liken it to like badging in the door. I can try to badge in this door. Oh wait, I'm standing in a broom closet. I don't get anything in here. But I badge into this door now, and all of a sudden I can see the whole data center. So you can use those configuration names with your remoting sessions to create very different experiences on the exact same box. So if you don't have the ability to specify that session name going in, you're stuck with that default remoting session. Great question. Yeah. Let's go back to that one. I need to grab that updated link. All right. So let's do this. Where is it? All right, folks, this is how you get results. Ready? At PowerShell Team on Twitter. And I'm doing this very imprecisely on purpose so it's a public conversation, right? So at PowerShell Team. At Posh Summit. An attendee pointed out that the PowerShell extension for code floods the logging and transcription features. Who do we talk to about making code a good citizen of logging? How's that? Does that capture it? All right. I know there's, see, the real way to do this is to go to the repo for the PowerShell extension in GitHub. You would go to the repo for all kinds of chatter behind the scenes, just noise. Yeah. He said he set it up in a lab with just VS Code doing nothing, and it was just in the background had these tasks it was running, it was just filling the logs. Yeah.
Is that with us? So, Tyler Lionheart is responsible for that extension. He is super approachable. I mean, he's on us on Twitter. And
Okay. I just don't remember, because it used to be David, and I didn't remember who took it over. Tyler, that's right. Because I think I remember seeing him last year talking about it. Yeah. So we'll get some attention there. The proper way to do that, though, is to go to the GitHub repo for the extension, file an issue, or open an issue against code to say, hey, look, please don't be so chatty.
yeah, and I think our Keith Hill is on that as well.
Okay.
I've seen that.
Yeah, Keith's been working on this for years in the original Visual Studio full up plugin as well. Yeah. Yep.
Don't forget to hit send on your tweet so I can reach you.
I thought I did. Let's see. Yeah, I think it went. Let's see. Alrighty. Actually, I didn't do that very publicly. I forgot to put like a dot before the at PowerShell team, so that went directly to them. Anyway. Yeah, that's my bad. Sorry. My Twitter foo was off. Yeah, that's not the best way to win friends and influence people. Yeah. Fix it there. So a little bit on how I wrote the lab. So I used VS Code. I'm on my Mac. I use VS Code. I have PowerShell installed. I have the lab space spun up, and I'm writing the labs in Markdown. And then I use, when you go to the command processor, I installed a Markdown Converter. So Markdown Convert document, and that's what cranks out the PDFs. So I just wrote the whole thing in Markdown and then used the Markdown plugin and code to crank out the PDF lab guide that you guys are using. And then I wrote my own code to actually scan the lab guide, and I called it Get Lab Script, which actually goes through and takes the Markdown file name, replaces it with PS1, and inserts line breaks and looks for anywhere that I have code fences in Markdown and pulls out those lines and makes them into a PowerShell region and an end region when it's done with the code fences. And if it's a regex that says a line begins with a backtick, which is the backtick is your markdown for code, right? If I have that in the line, then it'll take out the backticks and just make that as the lines. So I could edit the lab guide and then just hit go, and it would pull out just the scripted lines for your PS1. That's why that's not exactly accurate in a few places, but anyway.
Smart quotes are very evil. Yeah.
The line ending is the result. It's copy paste from.
Right.
Well, the new version of Windows has Notepad has support for Linux style characters.
Yeah, it's the copy paste from IC thing.
Yeah.
Because
Just run the ISE as an elevated session and you'll be fine. Just run it straight in there. Then. Right, sure. It all works then. Sudo for everyone.
Yeah.
But it's one of the shocking things about Microsoft modifying Notepad. First change in like 10 years, they modified was to support Unix or Mac style character fields and
Okay.
new lines. Kind of shows how Microsoft
Is it in Windows features now? Okay.
Okay, let me add that to the notes thing. I wasn't aware that that's in a feature now. Yeah. So we can do PuTTY or WSL or enable the, what's the, is just OpenSSH? What's the title of Windows feature?
On Windows 10, what was the release? You said it was 1809 and above. Okay. Cool. That's why I love the community. All of us is smarter than one of us.
So yeah, part of the strategy in that last lab 4 is to say, turn up all the logging. I'm sure there's some type of performance hit when you do that. I've not measured it. There's ways to measure it. I've not measured it. But because some of those evil tricks will disable a portion of the logging, maybe not the transcripts or vice versa. The other thing that's not really covered in here, that's covered in Lee's paper, is hardening these things, hardening your logs, hardening the transcript directory so that people can't go cover their tracks. Yeah. So, like I said, this is really just intended as an intro to the topic. So, but there's definitely additional steps you should take.
Is there a way you can put to on the transcripts
You can write it to any path, including a network share. And that's what Dave was mentioning earlier, was that when you get to a network share, sometimes you get into some interesting permissions issues trying to write out to a network share. But that's one of the recommendations in Lee's paper, is to write it off box on the transcripts so that they can't be
Removed locally.
double hops, but the issue is in there.
There's no
Well, transcription is not really an event log, right? So you could use Windows Event Forwarding to get it off box. That's one way to do it. And then when it comes to that on Windows 10, Server 2016 and above, there's also encrypted logging. But when you use encrypted logging, it kind of breaks our little search tools, right? But the encrypted logging will actually use a document encryption certificate. You give it the public key. Yes, you give it the public key in the group policy. You copy the text of the public key, and you can deploy that to your machines. So it's encrypted as it writes it into the event log. So if you have, I know nobody here used into the Windows event log. And I know nobody here ever embeds passwords and clear text in your scripts. But if you had like database connection strings, things that were sensitive that you wouldn't want to be seen in the logs, you could encrypt them. And then you have your Windows Event Forwarding, Splunk, whatever, pulls that off the machine, and then you can decode or decrypt that payload message body using the private key off box. So yeah, there's lots of other features here to explore definitely around protecting those logs. Yeah. So we've got 10 minutes left, and I've been answering a lot of questions already. Are there other questions that you've come up with as you go through the lab, things that you'd like to talk about before we got another 10 minutes, so just want to open up for any other Q&A in general, just anything PowerShell security. Yeah.
Why did you go with get Windows instead of get just so you could
So get event log versus get when event. This is a really good question. I'm glad you asked. So get event log will look at application, system, some of those classic style Windows logs, but it does not look at the new style Windows logs like the operational logs. So you can't use get when event. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but you can't use get event log to look at those new logs that we need to view. So number one, it's not possible to use get event log. Number two, get when event, you have to use it to look at those logs, but it also has this complicated filtering capability with filter XPath and filter XML. And I hate XML because I'm an ops guy. I'm not a developer. I hate XML. And so you can go look for my blog post on XML versus IT Pro, where I talk about how to filter in the logs on specifically using the XPath. There's two blog posts I wrote on that several years ago. And I go into how to use the filter XPath versus filter XML and how to then very strategically filter against stuff in the message body, the properties, time. You can put a criteria in there of like how many milliseconds of history you want to look at, which I recommend. I gave you a very simple get when event command here, but on the ones that I use, I'm going to have a filter for there's a big complex way to put the system time and calculation, how many milliseconds of history. I'll go back like 6 hours maybe. And then I say where the message body is not equal to prompt, and I'll put all that into one big filter XPath or filter XML. So you can look at those blog posts for more information. If you just put go TPFE and XML and events or something like that, you'll find it in a search. So there's 2 blog posts on that. Also, the Hey Scripting Guy blog has some articles as well. There's some really easy cheats on how to build those filters. If you use the graphical interface for Windows Event Viewer, and then there's this tab that says the behind the scenes view, the XML view. You click that, you can copy that XML straight out into a string that you call filter XPath and pass that in, and you're filtering just like you did in the GUI. So you can cheat and build your filters in the GUI, then copy the XML out of there and paste it into your script. Yeah. And you don't have to learn how to write XML.
There's also a filter hash table.
Love hash tables. You can use hash tables a dozen different ways in PowerShell. Beautiful thing. Yeah.
Are transcripts running as the user that's running PowerShell, or is it like a system? It's in terms of like virtual machines and so on.
So I'm logged in as user Bob, and Bob needs access to write to the transcript directory. That's a true statement, because I just ran into this with a customer a week or two ago, where they had found this Windows logs path, like C Windows logs, and they said, let's put our PS transcripts in there under a PS transcript directory. And they were getting intermittent things hitting the transcript. Some would, some wouldn't. Anything that ran with administrator credentials that had ability to write under the Windows directory would be able to write in the transcript. So, but the everyday user couldn't, because they didn't have permissions to write into the Windows directory. So that's part of that more advanced detail I didn't want to get into in today's session. But yes, you want to make sure that whoever the user, basically everyone on that box, authenticated users, whatever group you want to use, will need access to write to that directory. And then you can remove the read access from them, but they'll need write access to that directory.
I guess you could do it as like create file and then allow them to create their own write to the right file.
Right. The depository
Create a
type.
file and write to it, but then you can't see it.
Right.
Right.
So I burned myself on that when I set up transcription the first time. My company has an old piece of crap legacy apps, and one of the apps couldn't complete the transcription writing, and it just hung me out. Because I didn't realize that I could get permissions to the directory. So it's not just like, hey, I can't write it and go on. I mean, I don't know why, because I don't know the application, but the app just started getting fluky because it couldn't complete what it was trying to do. So you got to think that one through for sure.
It also mucked with App Fabric in IIS for us with our internal application. So.
If you guys wouldn't mind, David and you guys here, send me a tweet with that, because I have this mental condition that gets worse the older I get. It's called IFS. I forget stuff. And yeah, so if you could please tweet that to me, so I remember to put it in my notes later, because I'm compiling these types of tips so that as I engage with customers, I can help them do this more efficiently and know what the pitfalls are. One of these days I might blog it again, so if I ever get a new blog.
So, yes.
I do have one question. How many people here are actually thinking about going back to their day jobs, trying to implement some, if not, many of the components here, like increased logging and event logging, that sort of thing? Is this something that you guys could implement? You have the authority and the ability to implement this right now within your environment, or is this something you probably want to talk to your team about? Hey, well, this is going to create an increased load on logging, or we're going to have to roll these up across network, so we'll have to cross-collaborate with different team members. Do you guys feel you have enough information to go out and actually implement this sort of thing, or do you think this
It's the information, but it's needs to come down from somebody with authority, because our managers don't believe me.
I wonder if this is a non-technical problem that, also we could use white papers, guides to say, hey, this is the overall concept of what we're doing here. This is industry practice. This is good ideas for what PowerShell discipline is.
So here, let me give you some ammo. If you go to aka.ms/pssec, I think it's linked in the lab guide somewhere. The short link, I know that's really tiny, aka.ms/pssec, PowerShell Security. This is a blog post that I published, when was this, 2016, is PowerShell a vulnerability, right? And it's the same CIO conversation I opened with. And this has a lot of the links and the information that you need to have this conversation at the right level in your organization to engage your team. A lot of this focuses on remoting as well, why remoting is secure. Remoting is not a vulnerability. It obeys all the Windows permissions. And as Joey said yesterday from the main stage, PowerShell is not a vulnerability in your environment. Hackers like it because everybody else likes it. It makes your work go faster, right? So PowerShell is not how people get in to your environment. Now, that being said, if you open up a malicious Word doc that's infected with some malware that's going to go out and do an invoke, an IEX, invoke expression from a web download, right? It's using PowerShell to introduce some other type of malware to infect your environment, right? But PowerShell itself is not a vulnerability or an attack vector necessarily. And like I opened with, just remember when you have this conversation that you want to ask them point blank, would you rather that we use other tools we cannot track in our environment? Or would you rather have an audit trail with a black light and glowing fingerprints? And I don't have the slide deck here today, but there's a really good quote from Matt Graber it was like September of 2017 on Twitter. He basically said, the fingerprints in PowerShell are so good, I'm not using PowerShell anymore to do my attacks, effectively is what he said. And that's what they said from the stage yesterday as well, is that people are moving away from PowerShell because of this. But if you haven't turned this on in your environment, you're still in the dark, right? You've got to start somewhere. You've got to turn on the logging so that you have a way to find what's happening in your environment. There's a lot of other things that we didn't really get into today on the proactive side, blocking PowerShell in an appropriate way. There's App Locker, there's Device Guard, there's other ways to proactively block malicious code. AMPC will do that as well. I'm getting the high sign here. Is it? Oh, yes, we're at time. All right. Thanks for coming, everybody. Please leave an evaluation. Thank you very much.